Welcome all to Whispers in the Dark, where shadows breathe and forgotten voices stir. Step beyond the veil and lose yourself in a realm where reality fractures and nightmares whisper lullabies. Here we conjure true psychological thrillers, haunted tales, and horror stories that burrow deep beneath your skin and nestle in the quiet corners of your mind. Each story crackles like old film reels, unspooling secrets too heavy for daylight. Whether it's the slow unraveling of a fractured psyche or the cold caress of something unseen lurking just behind you, we promise narratives that will haunt you long after the final word is spoken. So get ready, dim the lights, slip on your headphones and listen closely for the whispers in the dark, and subscribe if you dare to return.
They always say you'll know when something's wrong, that your body will send signals, goosebumps, a chill, the prickle at the back of your neck. But I didn't feel any of that until it was too late. It was me, Dylan, and Chris, 3 guys in our early 30s who'd done our share of hiking and camping. Nothing hardcore, just weekend getaways to get away from the grind. That April, we picked a remote stretch in northern Vermont, near a defunct trail called Widemore Loop. It used to be a logging road, but overgrowth and landslides made it nearly impassable. That's what we liked about it. No crowds. We parked our car on a gravel pull-off and hiked 6 hours in, setting up camp near a dead creek. The silence out there was unreal. No traffic hum, no airplanes, no signal. Just wind and trees, like the forest itself was holding its breath. The first night was uneventful, though I woke up once to what I thought was distant humming, like a low engine running beneath the ground. Chris joked it was the earth farting. I laughed, but it stuck with me. The next morning we hiked deeper. No trail, just compass and instinct. Around noon, Dylan spotted something strange on the edge of a shallow ravine, a black opening in the rock face, half covered in moss and rot. A cave. We weren't spelunkers, but curiosity got the better of us. It wasn't a deep descent, maybe 30 feet at most, but once we slipped through that narrow mouth of stone, it felt like the air changed, denser, like breathing through wet cloth. We switched on our headlamps. The walls shimmered strangely, like they were coated in oil, though dry to the touch. The deeper we went, the stranger things got. The cave curved unnaturally, like a spiral that tightened as we moved. The walls became smoother, less like stone and more like something molded, engineered. That's when we found the symbols, not carved, not painted. They were part of the rock itself, shifting, almost organic shapes that seemed to change slightly, depending on the angle you looked at them, like an optical illusion, except wrong. Chris muttered they looked like veins. Dylan said they looked like letters. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to admit that they made my head hurt just to look at them. We reached a cavern after maybe 20 minutes of winding through that unnatural tunnel. It was massive, the size of a gymnasium, maybe larger, and in the center was a pit, not just a hole, a perfect circle. Black, and not reflecting any of our lights. It absorbed them. I tossed a pebble in. No sound, no echo, just gone. I don't know how long we stared. It felt like minutes, but it could have been seconds or hours. Then Dylan whispered, "Do you hear it?" I strained. Then I did. A rhythm, like breathing. No, not quite. More like something being breathed through. Massive, slow, but unmistakably alive. Chris swore and backed away, muttering about turning around. But Dylan stepped closer to the edge, said something about the walls, pulsing in time with the sound. I reached to pull him back, but he staggered and dropped to his knees. I'll never forget his face. His eyes were locked open, pupils blown wide, mouth slack. Then he smiled. Not a goofy grin, something else. A peaceful smile, like he'd seen something beautiful. Then he spoke. Except it wasn't his voice. The words, if they were words, didn't make sense. Not English, not any language I've ever heard. They sounded wet, hollow and ancient. They echoed in the chamber in ways that didn't match the acoustics. I can't explain it better than that. It felt like the sound was crawling over my skin. Chris screamed and pulled Dylan back. He was unresponsive, just murmuring that same grotesque liturgy. That's when we saw the pit move. Something shifted inside. Something impossibly massive. Not a form we could define, but motion. A suggestion of limbs, or tendrils, or something else entirely. We ran. We didn't speak. We didn't stop until we reached camp, and even then, Dylan had to be dragged. His eyes were wrong, the whites stained faintly grey. His voice, when it returned, was calm and flat. Not his anymore. Like he was mimicking being Dylan. We left the forest at dawn. Chris and I never went back. Dylan? He stopped sleeping. Said the dreams weren't his. He started writing symbols, on napkins, on walls. He filled 3 journals before disappearing 2 months later. Police said he likely wandered off during a breakdown. But Chris and I knew. Chris died last winter. Suicide, they said. But I saw the note. It just read, "It's still whispering." I hear it too sometimes. A low hum when everything's quiet, like the world's engine idling just beneath the crust, and sometimes I feel drawn back to the place, like something is waiting, watching, breathing. I've mapped the way once, just once. I burned the map last week, but I still dream about the pit and the thing inside. Not what it looks like. I don't think we can see it properly. I just remember the feeling. That we were ants crawling on the edge of a God's open eye. It saw us. People romanticize the woods. They come out here thinking it's pure and untouched, like something sacred. But I've been a forest ranger for almost 20 years, and I'll tell you the truth. The woods keep secrets. They bury them. And sometimes they refuse to let them stay buried. It happened in the fall of 2019, northern Montana, near the tail end of the Bitterroots. I was covering a section of land we don't normally patrol, backcountry area, old fire zone, a place nobody really visits unless they're lost or looking for something. I was out checking on illegal tree cutting reports, following a faint trail about 8 miles from the closest service road. The day was grey, cloudy, no wind, no animal sounds, which struck me as odd but not unheard of. Nature sometimes goes quiet before a storm or if a predator's around. I followed a dry creek bed until I saw something that shouldn't have been there. A hole. It was about 4 feet wide, framed in old timber rotted with age. The ground around it was cracked like it had sunk, and half buried next to it was what looked like a rusted cart rail. I realized I was looking at an old mine shaft. We have maps of the area, and I'd studied them enough to know. This wasn't marked. No records, no documentation, nothing. Normally, I would have flagged it, taken GPS coordinates, and left. But something about it gnawed at me. Not curiosity, not even fear. More like pressure. Like I had to know what was down there. I radioed in my position but got static. Not unusual. Signals crap out here. I dropped a glow stick and watched it fall. It flickered out maybe 30 feet down. Not too far. I had my gear, rope, and harness. I descended slowly, testing each foothold. The wood creaked, but the shaft held. The air grew cold and stale, like something left in a freezer too long. When I reached the bottom, I immediately noticed something wrong. Not just the cold, not just the silence, the walls. They weren't rough cut, not like a normal mine. They were smoother, almost carved, not by hand, more like water had shaped them, but in symmetrical patterns, grooves, spirals. I brushed my glove over them and felt the stone pulse, not vibrate, pulse, like a heartbeat. I told myself it was just in my head, just adrenaline, but I already knew I should have left. The tunnel curved sharply to the left, and I walked, counting my steps. About 50 feet in, my flashlight hit something that made me stop cold. A figure, sitting against the wall. It was a man, or what was left of one, mummified, skin stretched tight over bone, mouth frozen mid-scream. He wore a jacket like mine, green canvas, a US Forest Service patch on the shoulder, faded, decades old. I backed away, heart racing. Then I heard something, breathing. Not mine, deep, wet and slow, echoing from further down the tunnel. I turned and saw something shift in the shadows, not a shape, more like the absence of light itself, moving, unfurling like smoke underwater. I ran. God help me. I turned and ran, up the shaft, scraping my hands, the wood splintering under my gloves. I didn't stop until I burst into the forest again, lungs burning, the sky somehow darker than it had been, but it didn't feel like I'd left. The silence followed me. No birds, no wind, just that pressure. Like being watched from behind my eyes. I hiked the 8 miles back in a trance, like I was walking on a frozen lake, and each step might crack it. When I got back to the outpost, I didn't file a report. I didn't say a word, but I started looking into missing rangers, old ones, guys who disappeared in the 60s and 70s. I found 3 names who had patrolled that region, all presumed dead. None recovered. And then last month I got a package. No return address. Inside was a map, a topographic chart of that area. My area. A red X marked the shaft. But there were more, dozens of them, each marked with a number and a date, all future dates, and mine was circled. Next week. Now every time I close my eyes, I hear it, the breathing, closer, louder. The woods are still silent, as if waiting. The pressure's worse at night, like gravity's bending the wrong direction. I haven't slept in 3 days. I don't know if that thing in the shaft was ever human. I don't think it kills in the usual sense. I think it remembers people, consumes them in time. And now it remembers me. I can feel it, still down there, shifting, waiting. And I know someday soon I'll go back. I won't have a choice, because the mine isn't just beneath the forest, it's beneath everything. I've told this maybe 6 times in my life, not because I don't want to talk about it, but because no one believes it. Even the ones who do pretend they don't. It's easier to ignore something when it hides underground. This happened in 2017 in a cave system near southern Utah. It's technically uncharted, but locals call it Marrow's Bend, mostly known to extreme spelunkers, no paved routes, no guides, just limestone tunnels and dead ends. I was into caving pretty deep at that point, no pun intended. I'd done dozens of mapped routes, a few undocumented ones, but this was my first time doing something with real danger. Tight spaces, vertical drops, bad air pockets. It was me, Kyle and Brennan who had a GoPro set up and wanted to record the whole thing. Kyle was the experienced one, ex-military. I trusted him completely. We entered the cave around noon, hiked 2 miles from the service road to the entrance. It was barely wide enough to crawl through at first, but it opened up into a narrow corridor about 5 feet high, like a hallway for something just a little too big to be human. That should have been the first sign. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. Your breath starts echoing weirdly in caves. It comes back delayed, like someone's breathing just behind you. You get used to it. You tell yourself it's normal. 2 hours in, We found a vertical drop Kyle called the throat, about 30 feet down, barely wide enough to lower your body. Brennan went first, then me, then Kyle. That's when things shifted. The air was colder at the bottom, still air, not even a breeze, but it felt like it was moving, like it was flowing in patterns too slow for your eyes to catch. And there was a smell, not rot, older, like wet copper and something burned. Kyle pointed to a fissure in the wall, maybe 2 feet wide. It sloped downward into darkness. "We go in through there," he said. Brennan hesitated, but I didn't. I wanted the story, I wanted the footage, I wanted the thrill. We wormed through, belly down, helmets scraping. Every breath echoed like a scream muffled by fabric. The passage narrowed, then widened suddenly. We emerged into a chamber, maybe 20 feet across, but shaped wrong. Not natural wrong, constructed wrong. The walls were symmetrical, ribbed, like a throat or a tunnel designed by something that had never seen light. Smooth, curved. Almost womb-like, Brennan muttered. "Jesus!" And it bounced off the walls like 20 voices whispered it back. Then Kyle spotted the markings. At first, they looked like scratches, but too even. Carved symbols, shallow but precise, spaced evenly along the walls in spirals. They didn't look human, not tribal, not written, just old, beyond old. The stone around them looked darker, like it had bled. I touched one. Just curious. Just a brush of the glove. That's when we heard it. A sound like bone scraping on bone. Not loud, not sudden, just present, from deeper inside the cave. It sounded like something was moving, not walking, dragging. Brennan said we should leave. Kyle agreed. I didn't argue. We turned to exit the chamber, and the fissure we came through was gone. Gone. Not collapsed, just not there. A solid wall where the passage had been. We all panicked. Kyle banged on the wall, swore. Brennan dropped the GoPro. I felt my legs go numb. That wall was not there when we entered. I remembered the shape, the angle. It was impossible. Then the air changed. It felt thick, like it had weight. My chest got tight. We backed toward the far side of the chamber, looking for another exit, and then we saw the hole, perfectly circular, in the floor, about 6 feet across. No edges, no debris. Just smooth black stone around it, and no sound from inside. Kyle peered in with his light. The beam vanished, like it was swallowed. He turned to us, eyes wide. "It's not a shaft," he said. "It's not going down." And then Brennan started screaming. I didn't see it at first. I was too busy trying to understand what Kyle had meant. But Brennan fell back, kicking, pointing, and I saw it. A face. Only it wasn't a face. Not in the way we recognize one. It was a suggestion of a face. Features that moved. Eyes that opened in the wrong places. A mouth that breathed sideways. It was peeking from the edge of the chamber like it had always been there, but just now decided to reveal itself, and then another, and another. Figures too tall, too thin, too smooth, not walking, not floating, just emerging from the wall itself like they were being birthed from the stone. Silently. No footsteps, no growls, just shapes, endless and patient, closing in. Kyle pushed us back and screamed for us to run, to find anything. Brennan fled into the dark. I heard him sobbing, and then nothing. No scream, no struggle, just silence. Kyle turned and looked me in the eye. "I'll hold them," he said. I didn't understand. I tried to stop him, but he ran into them. No weapon, no chance, just ran. I was alone. I turned. I don't know how I found it, a narrow seam, the wall I hadn't noticed before. I was free. I don't think that place was a cave. I think it was a door. And I'm afraid I left it open. I've always been drawn to the deep, the quiet places where light dies and the weight of the world sits heavy on your chest. I'm not talking metaphorically. I'm talking literally. I'm a cave diver. It's a niche within a niche, something that combines claustrophobia, darkness, and danger into one obsessive pursuit. I used to tell people it was peaceful, being hundreds of feet below ground, swimming through underwater tunnels where no human had ever gone. But I don't say that anymore. Not since Widow's Throat. It's a lesser-known cave system near Tulum in Mexico. Not on the tourist maps, and not part of the main cenote routes you see influencers paddling through in their GoPros. It was Morgan, another diver I'd met through a Facebook group, who told me about it, said the locals refused to go near it, said it wasn't mapped per se, but it was there. Quiet, still, waiting. We went in early morning. The water was colder than expected, even in full gear. Descent was smooth at first. Tight tunnels, calcite formations, narrow corridors branching like tree roots. Everything you expect. But something was off. The water had a strange taste, even through the regulator, metallic and bitter. And it was still. Too still. I remember thinking, even at 60 feet down, that I couldn't hear myself breathe, not in the usual way. The sound of my exhale was muffled, like it was being absorbed. At around 90 feet, Morgan signaled he was going ahead down a narrow shaft we'd spotted on the left wall. I followed slower, staying close, but not too close, in case of a silt-out. The shaft dipped sharply, spiraling downward like a drain, and that's when I noticed the wall carvings. They weren't natural. I'm certain of that. Etched lines, repeating in circular patterns, symbols, not writing exactly, but intentional. I flashed my torch over them and felt a cold ripple down my spine, not from the water, from inside me. My guts turned. Morgan didn't even pause. He disappeared through the opening below. I hesitated 5 seconds too long, then went in after him. The passage dropped about 20 feet into a wider chamber, maybe 12 feet across and high enough to swim upright. But the walls, they weren't stone. Not exactly. They shimmered subtly, like the surface of something alive. I kicked my fins and rotated, trying to find Morgan, but he wasn't there. No bubbles, no torchlight, nothing. I flashed my beam around and froze. Embedded in the far wall, no, emerged from it was a diving mask, faceplate up. Lens cracked. A regulator hung beside it, still connected to a tank resting upright on the floor, covered in silt but unmistakable. Morgan's gear. I swam closer, heart pounding. Couldn't see him at first. Then I saw the glove. His hand, sticking out from the wall itself, not trapped, not crushed, fused. Like the rock had grown over him, the fingers twitched. I swear to you, they twitched. I turned to leave, and that's when I noticed. There was no opening. The shaft we'd come through was gone. Sealed. Solid rock in every direction. The water pressure shifted subtly. Something was moving. It wasn't a current. It was slower, pulsing, like a heartbeat from the walls themselves. And then came the sound. Not sharp, not loud, just wet. Slithering. Wet skin sliding against stone. I backed away from the wall, torch shaking, casting shadows that didn't match their sources. I felt something brush past my leg. Slick. Cold, I kicked upward instinctively and smashed into the ceiling. No exit. No gaps. My torch flickered, and in the moment of darkness I saw it, a face, but not a human one. A suggestion of one. Eyes where eyes shouldn't be, mouths layered like gills, opening in silence. Teeth too narrow, too many. Skin like translucent jelly, stretched thin over something angular. It didn't lunge. It didn't need to. It just watched, and I felt it seeing me. Not just my body, my thoughts, my memories. Every shameful thing I'd hidden from the world. It saw it all. I panicked. I reached for my backup light, switched it on, and kicked wildly. My shoulder clipped the edge of a wall, or what I thought was a wall. But it gave way like flesh tearing open, and suddenly I was pulled through. Not swimming, dragged. The water spun around me and my ears popped, and then I was shooting upward through a narrow shaft I hadn't seen before. Light above. Real light. Daylight. I broke the surface, gasping, coughing water, slamming into stone. I was back in the cenote, open sky overhead, no sign of Morgan, no bubbles, nothing. I screamed for help, no one came. Eventually I climbed out alone. The sun felt wrong, too hot, too bright. They never found him. Search and rescue sent divers 2 days later. They said there was no chamber, no shaft, no carvings. They accused me of hallucinating. Bends maybe, or panic. But I know what I saw, and I know it knows me now. Sometimes I wake up choking on water that isn't there, or I find silt on my floor when I haven't been near a cave in months, and at night when it's quiet I hear the regulator hiss of someone breathing behind me, and I pray, every time, that it's just a memory. I've never told anyone what happened beneath the ridge near Owl's Hollow, mostly because I know how it sounds, irrational, paranoid, like a man unraveling after too long alone in the dark. But I wasn't alone that day, and what I saw down there has never left me, not even for a single night. I was hiking alone through state-protected woodland, a place I knew well, searching for old survey markers when I found the cave, a small mouth in the hillside, half covered by roots and shale. It wasn't on my map, but that wasn't unusual. There are 100 unnamed pockets in these forests. I've spent years cataloguing them, stepping where no boot prints have ever been, but this one felt different, even before I stepped inside. The air pouring out was cold, wet, still as a tomb, and smelled faintly like rusted metal and damp stone. I lit my headlamp and crawled in, figuring I'd go 10 or 15 feet before it narrowed too tight for comfort, but the passage just kept going, descending gradually, then sharply until I was a good 100 feet down, and the light from the entrance had long vanished behind the bends in the rock. The walls were strange, not jagged like most limestone corridors, but oddly smooth, as though worn not by water but by hands, as though something had polished them over time. I told myself it was a natural formation, maybe wind or ancient glacial pressure, but in my gut I felt something else, like I was in a place that had been used. Eventually the tunnel opened into a chamber, not huge but tall, maybe 20 feet from floor to ceiling, with a curved dome of black rock slick with condensation. My light flicked upward, and that's when I saw the markings, not carved, not painted, just there, shapes and patterns that pulsed faintly under my beam as if absorbing it, reacting, changing subtly when I blinked. I took a step closer, and the ground gave slightly underfoot. Not enough to trip me, but enough to let me know it wasn't solid stone beneath me anymore. I knelt and brushed away the loose grit, and my stomach clenched hard under my ribs. Beneath the dirt were rows of bones, hundreds of them, small, animal at first glance, but too symmetrical, too arranged, like someone had laid them out deliberately in concentric circles, radiating from the center of the room. I should have turned back then. I know I should have. But I was frozen, drawn in, like gravity was stronger down here, like the air itself was pushing me forward. Then I heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like a shift in pressure, a low resonating tone that vibrated in my sternum more than my ears, a note so deep and steady it made the walls seem closer, sent nausea curling up my spine like heat from an oven. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw the figure at the mouth of the tunnel, not standing, not crawling, just there, emerging without sound or motion, its form wrong in ways my mind can't explain even now, like a shadow that had texture, an absence shaped like a man but too tall, too thin, its edges flickering like something behind glass underwater. It didn't move toward me. It didn't have to. I was already losing control of my limbs, falling backward into the bone-covered floor as the light from my headlamp dimmed without flickering, like it was being drained. I could feel it then. Not the figure, but the place, the weight of it pressing in, not just from around me, but from inside me, like my thoughts weren't mine anymore, like something else was watching through my eyes, breathing with my lungs, trying me on like a jacket. And then the silence broke, but not with noise, with understanding, like something old and infinite was peeling open part of me I didn't know could be reached, a place in the mind built to stay locked, and it entered. I don't remember screaming, but I know I did. The chamber felt endless now, as if I'd stepped into a fold in the world, a pocket outside time where the rules of direction and matter had begun to fray and dissolve like wet paper. I don't know how I got out. I remember crawling, hands bleeding, knees torn, head slamming stone, but nothing else. Just the blinding shock of sunlight and the smell of pines as I emerged, screaming into the forest like a man reborn in fire. No one believed me, of course. Not the park service, not my friends. Not even the therapist I saw for months after, who kept hinting at trauma or fugue states. But none of them were there. None of them felt it. And every night now, when I close my eyes, I feel that pressure again. That impossible weight, like the world is thinner than we think, and something deeper is always watching, always hungry, and I know someday it will call me back. I never planned to go that deep. The cave wasn't marked on any map. It was just a dark opening in the side of a crumbling slope. Easy to miss unless you were off trail and paying too much attention. I'd been hiking solo for years. It was how I escaped the noise, the people, the constant static of city life. Nature didn't lie to you. It didn't pretend to be anything but what it was. It was mid-October, and the air was sharp with rot and pine. I'd followed a deer path off the main trail to get a better view of a ridgeline when I spotted the opening. At first, I thought it was a shadow, but the longer I looked, the more wrong it felt, like the rock had peeled open on its own. It wasn't just the darkness, it was the stillness. No wind, no dripping water, no life, just a mouth in the rock, waiting. I told myself I'd just look inside. 5 minutes. I had 2 headlamps and a backup flashlight. I wasn't careless. I noted the coordinates on my GPS. I marked the tree near the entrance with orange tape. Everything was by the book. The tunnel sloped downward in a way that didn't feel entirely natural. It was too straight, not perfectly man-made, but not fully organic either, like something between the two. The air grew cold almost instantly. Not just temperature cold, but deep cold, the kind that settles in your chest and makes your breath feel borrowed. The walls were damp but smooth. I ran a hand along one side as I moved deeper, using touch as reassurance. The texture was strange. Not stone, not clay, not anything I could quite identify. It wasn't slippery, but it gave slightly under pressure. Almost like skin. I paused, shook the thought off and kept going. The tunnel bent left, then right, then opened up into a wide chamber. I wasn't expecting that. My light scanned across the space, 15, maybe 20 feet across. The ceiling rose sharply overhead and disappeared into darkness. My beam didn't reach the top it should have. There were no bats, no insects, not even dust, just that unnatural cold. I clicked my tongue, listening for echo. The sound came back late, not loud, delayed, and something about the timing made my gut tense. I considered turning back. I wanted to. But I felt drawn in, like the tunnel behind me was gone now, and only forward made sense. That's hard to explain. It wasn't compulsion, not quite. just inevitability. I stepped further in and noticed the ground had changed. The packed dirt was smoother here, pressed down in flat circular patches, almost like paths, worn into patterns. I moved my light across them slowly. Each one seemed slightly different, like they weren't made by the same shape or even the same kind of creature. Some wide and flat, others thin and dragging. I kept telling myself I was misinterpreting natural erosion. Then I found the pile. It was off to one side, partially collapsed against the wall. Bones, dozens of them. Not buried, not scattered, stacked, arranged deliberately. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old enough to be dust either. Some still had fibers on them, clothes maybe or hair. A boot was half crushed under one side of the heap. Modern nylon laces. I backed away before I could see anything else. I knew I had to leave, but the tunnel didn't look the same. I turned back toward where I came in and felt something heavy in my chest, the kind of pressure you get before a panic attack, like the room is shrinking. But I wasn't claustrophobic. I started walking. The light flickered once, just once, but it was enough. When it came back, the tunnel felt deeper, like it had stretched just a little, and the air had grown thicker. Breathing took effort now, like the air didn't want to be in my lungs. I moved faster, tracing my steps. Markings I'd scratched into the wall were gone. The turns weren't where they should be. Everything was slightly wrong, not wrong enough to scream, just enough to feel unstable. Off balance, the cold deepened, not temperature, but feeling. A hollowing cold, as if the cave had somehow reached inside me and pulled out something essential. I didn't feel panic anymore. I felt absence, like I had forgotten some part of who I was and didn't even know what I was missing. At some point I heard breathing. Not mine. It was slow, distant, but definitely there. It wasn't echo, it was rhythm. Intentional. I froze and turned my light behind me. Nothing, but I felt watched. I tried not to run. I remembered my training. Fast is noisy, fast is blind. But then I heard movement. Not footsteps, not skittering. Something heavier, slower, scraping, like something dragging wet limbs across stone. I don't know how long I ran. The tunnel kept going, kept changing, like the cave was shifting around me, a maze that didn't want to be solved. When I finally saw light, it wasn't mine. It was dim, natural, pale as bone. I ran toward it, breath hitching, throat burning. I emerged somewhere I didn't recognize. The trees were wrong. The moss was the wrong color. The light was off, dull and flat, like everything had been bleached. I turned to look back, but the cave wasn't there anymore. Just rock, solid untouched. I walked for hours before I found the trail. I've always been a rational man. I don't believe in ghosts or demons or anything that can't be measured or mapped or tested. I work in geology, surveying land, documenting rock formations, collecting core samples. It's dull to most, but it makes sense to me. Layers of history etched in stone, unfolding like a puzzle that wants to be solved. I was leading a small solo survey in a remote part of Kentucky, about 60 miles from the nearest paved road. I had maps, a permit, a rented ATV, and a cabin the mining company had been using for years as a base of operations. The area was limestone rich, shot through with sinkholes and caverns, and I was tasked with assessing the stability of a possible drilling site. The second morning, I hiked to an unmarked depression I'd seen on satellite imagery, deeper than the others, hidden by a dense ring of trees. It looked like an old collapse, but when I got there, I realized it was something else. A clean, vertical shaft, 15 feet across, swallowed by shadow. It looked like the earth had opened its mouth and waited. I lowered myself in carefully, using climbing gear and a headlamp strapped tight to my helmet. I didn't feel anything strange at first, just the familiar thrum of adrenaline, and the thrill of going somewhere untouched. The descent took longer than it should have. The walls were slick with moisture, but oddly smooth, like they'd been worn down over centuries by something more than water. The light from above vanished fast, replaced by the sterile white of my LED. 100 feet down, I hit the floor. It was dry, a dust so fine it clung to my boots like ash. I looked around slowly. There were no signs of wildlife, not even the flutter of bats or the scurry of cave insects. It was dead quiet, not silent exactly, just still, like even sound avoided this place. The passage ahead was narrow, but not unnavigable. I moved forward, marking my trail with biodegradable tape, leaving notes in my log at intervals. I told myself I'd explore for 20 minutes, just enough to map the chamber and take some photos for the report. The corridor opened into a dome-shaped room 20 meters across. The floor sloped gently toward the center, where something glinted beneath a thin layer of dust. I approached, expecting maybe a mineral vein or rusted equipment left by poachers, but it wasn't metal. It was stone, carved. Staggered slabs arranged in a circular pattern, each one etched with fine, almost organic-looking lines. Not writing, not exactly, but not random either. I crouched to take a photo and felt something shift beneath me. Not the ground, but something deeper than that. A vibration, too low to hear, too faint to feel directly, but it hit me behind the eyes like pressure rising in a plane cabin. I stood quickly, and the moment passed. But I didn't feel alone anymore. I told myself it was nerves, hunger, low blood sugar. I checked my watch. 28 minutes. I turned to leave, but couldn't remember which tunnel I came in from. There were 3 openings now, each identical. Identical angles, identical shadows. The tape marker was gone. Not torn off, just gone. My breath caught shallow in my throat. I picked a direction at random, tried to stay calm, tried to think like a scientist. I walked slowly, counting steps, scanning the walls for familiar shapes, but nothing repeated. Nothing looked right. The stone itself looked wrong. Not carved, not worn, but shaped. And not by time or water or tools. It felt grown. I know how that sounds, but it's the only word that fits. It grew into these forms, these tunnels, these rooms, existing for a purpose I couldn't fathom. At some point, my light began to dim. Gradual at first, then more erratic. I changed the battery, but it didn't help. The light wasn't dying. It was being swallowed. I kept moving, heart thudding against my ribs like a warning drum. And then I saw something in the distance, a shape. Not human, not animal. Something tall, wrongly proportioned, standing too still at the far end of the passage. I stopped. Couldn't breathe, dared not blink. I turned my head for half a second to check the wall beside me. And when I looked back, it was gone. I ran. I didn't care where. I just ran. Through corridor after corridor, until the walls began to pulse faintly, like they were breathing with me, or against me. And then I heard it, a sound behind me, not footsteps, but a dragging noise, slick and wet and deliberate. I didn't turn. I couldn't turn. My light was useless now, just a weak glow, barely touching the walls. I ran until the air thickened, until the stone ceiling pressed lower and lower, forcing me to crawl, my hands scraping over something soft that resisted slightly, and then gave way like wet tissue. I kept moving, sobbing without sound, until suddenly, light. Real light. Daylight. Filtering through a narrow slit in the rock. I don't remember climbing out. I just remember the wind on my face, and the sound of birds again, and the way my legs buckled when I realized I was out. I never submitted the report. I told the company the area was unstable, not worth the effort. They believed me. Do you? We found the opening by accident. It was late July, the heat mean and slow, and the whole ranch seemed to buzz with the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. My cousin Levi and I were wandering the north fence line, past the cattle trails and into the forgotten hills, just a couple of bored idiots looking for something old or dead to poke at. It was the kind of land our grandparents didn't like us going near, not because of danger, but because they never said why. Old land, they called it. Left alone too long. We stumbled on the hole after Levi kicked a rock into what should have been dirt, but sounded hollow like an empty drum. I remember him crouching, listening, a grin slowly pulling across his face that didn't look like it belonged to him. He said he could hear air moving beneath it. I didn't hear anything. Then again, some things don't make noise until you're close enough to feel them breathe. We came back the next day with a flashlight and rope and no real plan. We pulled rocks away, like children, unwrapping something that should have stayed buried. It was a vertical shaft, too clean, too round, like the earth hadn't made it, but something had pushed its way out from below. Levi was the first one in. He always went first. I followed, descending into a blackness that felt thicker than it should have. As soon as we were inside, it was like we'd left the world. The air didn't move. The sound of our own boots was swallowed mid-step. There was no echo, no smell, not even the cool damp you expect from a cave. Just a stillness so absolute it felt like being watched by something old and patient. The corridor sloped down, smooth and curved, stone walls like melted wax that had hardened into unnatural symmetry. I tried to convince myself it was just an old mine, some forgotten shaft from 100 years ago. But mines don't shape themselves like ribs curling inward. They don't throb faintly when you stand still long enough. Levi said it first, whispered it like he wasn't sure if it was in his head or coming from the rock. It's not hollow down here, it's full. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want him to explain. I think I already knew. We reached a chamber that widened into a perfect dome. Too perfect, like it had been carved from the inside by something that didn't use tools. The floor was covered in a fine powder that wasn't dirt or ash. It was softer, slick almost, like skin left too long in water. Buried in the center was something curved and white, thick as a tree trunk and spiraled like a shell or a horn or a piece of something that had once belonged to something living. I don't know why Levi touched it. Maybe it called to him. Maybe it knew he would. I only know that when his fingers made contact, the walls around us exhaled. Everything tightened. Something changed, not visibly, but in the weight of the air, the way it pressed on my chest like I'd sunk beneath a frozen lake. Levi started murmuring nonsense, words I didn't recognize, or maybe sounds that weren't words at all, soft and guttural, like something trying to mimic language. I pulled him back, and he stared at me blankly, like he'd been asleep on his feet. Then we heard it, a sound that didn't come from ahead or behind or above, but from everywhere at once. A low, wet shift, like something massive turning over in its sleep beneath the ground. I don't remember deciding to run. I just remember the way the dust curled around our legs as we sprinted back through the tunnel, the way the walls felt tighter now, like they'd moved closer somehow, like they wanted to hold us in. I looked back once, just once, and saw that Levi wasn't behind me anymore. I screamed his name until my throat burned, but the sound went nowhere. It was like the cave ate my voice. I climbed out alone, the light outside feeling too bright, too sharp. My hands shook for hours. I told everyone he disappeared hiking. They searched for weeks, nothing, no trail, no gear, no scent. Even the dogs refused to go past the ridgeline. Just whined and pulled away like they knew something waited beneath the ground. Since then, I've been back twice. I don't know why. Maybe I hoped I'd find him. Maybe I thought I could undo whatever we disturbed. But each time the opening was harder to find and smaller, like the earth was closing around it, healing over it, or hiding it, or worse, like it was waiting for someone else to open it again. And both times I felt it, that pressure in my skull, that sense that I was being counted. We weren't the first. I know that now. There were signs scratched faintly into the stone above the chamber, rows of tiny symbols that didn't look human, etched with something sharper than metal. They weren't warnings, they were names, and one of them changed after Levi disappeared. His name was there, spelled in a shape I somehow understood, as if the cave knew us, knew our bones, knew how to write our ending. I never went back after that. I've tried to forget, but I can't. Because at night, sometimes I hear it. Not in dreams, but in the walls, inside the hum of the fridge, in the static between stations. There are places in this world that resist the intrusion of memory, that bend the edges of thought until the mind fractures, trying to recall what should be simple. And yet I remember the cavern. I remember it not as one recalls a dream, but as a wound recalls the blade that made it. My name does not matter anymore, nor the year or season in which the thing occurred, only that it happened and that I carry it still, like a weight behind my ribs. I had taken to hiking alone after my divorce, bringing only my dog Mags with me, a black shepherd mixed with soft ears and eyes too wise for a creature that couldn't speak. She was the only company I could tolerate, loyal and silent, and somehow knowing when to stay close and when to give me space. It was mid-October when I first found the crack in the rocks, nestled in a depression past the tree line on the north edge of my late uncle's land. I never would have seen it if Mags hadn't stopped, paws planted, ears back, tail low. She growled once, low and uncertain, then whined, a sound I'd only heard from her once before, years back during a thunderstorm when something struck too close for comfort. The hole looked wrong, somehow too clean, like a wound that hadn't clotted properly. A cold air moved from it, despite the warmth of the day, and something in the back of my teeth ached, just standing near it. I returned the next day, with gear and with Mags trailing behind me, hesitant but unwilling to let me go alone. I lowered myself down into that breathing dark with her tethered safely above, though she barked and strained at the rope as I descended, as if to drag me back by force if she could have. The shaft gave way to a corridor, long, smooth, too symmetrical for natural erosion, and the air was wrong. It didn't smell, it didn't move, it simply was. I explored maybe 20 minutes before something shifted and I felt it. That pressure in my gut that told me I had trespassed into a place not meant for us. I turned back and returned to the surface to find Mags, no longer barking, but standing dead still, eyes locked on the hole, body rigid. I tried to touch her and she flinched, not from fear of me, but from something deeper, some awareness that I had come back changed. I promised her it was just a cave, and she didn't believe me. The next morning, she wouldn't eat and spent the day lying under my porch, silent, except for a faint whining sound that came every time I looked toward the tree line. I should have listened. I should have known better. The night she vanished, I was awoken by the sound of her claws pacing the wood floor, fast, irregular, panicked. When I rose to check, she was standing at the door, trembling, tongue dry as she panted hard. Her eyes found mine, and she let out a bark I had never heard before. Not fear, not anger, just urgency. And then she was gone. I found the door ajar and her tracks in the frost leading toward the ridge. I followed them for hours, calling, pleading, until the trail led me straight to that same crack in the earth, and stopped. It was smaller now, narrower, as though the land had tried to swallow it shut. I screamed her name until my voice cracked, but the only reply was that same stillness, that breathless, watching quiet. I returned the next day, lowered myself again, not for answers, but because I couldn't live without knowing what had happened to her. The tunnel had changed slightly, the slope deeper, the air heavier. I descended until I found the chamber again, and this time something waited. The pool was there in the center, silent, black as old oil, and beside it a paw print. Not just in the dust, but pressed into the very stone itself, as if the rock had softened under heat or pressure enough to preserve a moment of pain. I dropped to my knees and cried like a man watching the only part of himself worth loving be crushed underfoot. I do not remember leaving. I do not remember days after. I only know that my house no longer feels like home. Mirrors refuse to hold my reflection when I pass too quickly. Sometimes I wake to the sound of paws pacing again, but the floorboards do not creak beneath weight. And in the quietest hours of the night I feel her next to me, not warm, not breathing, just watching. And in her eyes I see not fear or pain but warning. That I brought something back, or worse, that I left something behind. I went to a vet once, a month after she vanished, just to talk. The vet remembered Mags. He asked how old she was now, and when I told him she was gone, he frowned and asked what I meant by gone. When I explained, he said something odd, said he'd seen animals act strange before, when owners got close to something bad, like the way some dogs bark at earthquakes before the ground moves. He said, maybe she was trying to protect me from something I couldn't feel yet. And I wonder if she succeeded or failed. Sometimes at night when the house is still, I smell the coldness of that cave again, not just in memory, but in reality, sharp and metallic like the breath of something that shouldn't breathe. I never planned on going into that cave alone, but plans unravel fast when you're 5 miles off grid and your hiking buddy comes down with altitude sickness. We'd driven to the Winters for a weekend escape from Salt Lake City, just 2 guys, no phones, no expectations, just hiking, camping. And if we found it, the cave I'd read about in a geology forum, a narrow limestone cavern, never formally mapped, supposedly tucked behind a dry waterfall in a canyon with no name. I know how that sounds, but I've always been the guy who reads too deep into things. And this cave, it felt like a secret worth chasing. The morning we were supposed to set out, Marcus looked like hell. His face was pale, sweaty, and he kept rubbing his temples like something was drilling into his skull. He practically begged me to go without him, said he'd rest at the site, maybe fish down at the stream. I hesitated but eventually agreed, promising to be back by sundown. I took what I needed, headlamp, chalk, gloves, water, and my GoPro strapped to my chest. I didn't tell him, but part of me hoped to document something strange. I just didn't know how strange. It took an hour of climbing to reach the dry waterfall on the ravine's edge, limestone and moss, just as described, and tucked behind the dead fall of brush, a narrow opening, barely shoulder width. I'd brought a coil of line just in case, tied it off at a tree, and dropped it into the dark slit before lowering myself in. The temperature dipped fast. Cool, damp air brushed my face, and the light from my headlamp bounced erratically along pale walls, dotted with calcite and lichen. The passage was tight at first, forcing me to crawl on my belly inch by inch, the rock cold and smooth under my chest. About 30 feet in, it opened up enough to crouch, then to stand. I remember the way the air changed in that moment. It went still, like I'd passed through an invisible curtain and everything behind me had shut off. Sound, pressure, even smell. It was just gone. I walked deeper, marking the wall with chalk, counting in my head. 100 steps, 200. Still, no end. I turned to check. Chalk marks were faint but visible. Relief. A minute later I noticed something strange on the wall, a symbol etched into the rock. Not carved, not natural. It looked scorched into the limestone, like someone had pressed a red-hot brand into it, a circle inside a triangle, surrounded by uneven, childlike scratches. I laughed nervously, telling myself some edgy explorer left it behind for fun, but my voice didn't echo. It just died in my throat. That's when I saw the footsteps. Small, bare, just ahead of me on the dusty floor. Children's feet. But they hadn't been there before. I followed them, because of course I did. Because curiosity is a sickness, and I had it worse than most. The steps led to a bend, then a split in the tunnel. I hesitated, marked both walls with arrows, and turned left, following the prints. The floor dipped and the space tightened. I ducked low, knees aching, but kept going. Then I heard it, whispering. Low, breathy, like someone trying to speak through water. It wasn't English, not any language I know. Just sound, wet, broken syllables that echoed from nowhere and everywhere. I froze and turned around. My chalk marks were gone, not faded, gone. The walls were clean, slick even. I touched them and felt a faint vibration like the stone was humming. Then I noticed the air was warmer, and I started to sweat. Panic hit fast. I turned and ran back the way I came, or thought I came. My headlamp flickered and I could hear the whispering now behind me, louder, closer. It wasn't one voice anymore, it was many, all overlapping. None made sense. I kept moving, heart pounding, legs shaking, until I stumbled into a narrow shaft, barely wide enough to squeeze through. I didn't remember passing it, but it was the only way, so I crawled inside. It felt like hours dragging myself through that tunnel, scraping my knees, shoulders catching on stone, breathing too fast and wasting air. Then I saw light. Not white, red. Light like something burning around the corner. I stopped, listened. No whispering now. No sound at all. I inched forward, turned the corner, and I swear I saw a room, a massive cavern, bigger than a cathedral, glowing from the walls themselves like the stone had swallowed fire. Standing in the center, backs turned, were 3 figures, small, unmoving. Children? Their skin was pale grey, their limbs too thin. They weren't breathing. They weren't anything. I backed away slowly, not daring to breathe. One of them turned. Not its head. The whole body twisted like its spine was soft until its face stared at me. I couldn't see eyes, just hollows. And then it opened its mouth. I don't remember screaming, just the pain. A high-pitched noise like static and knives in my head and blood pouring from my nose. I fell. I don't know how long I was out. When I woke, I was outside again. It was night. Marcus was gone. Camp untouched. His gear still there. His boots by the fire pit.
If you enjoyed the journey and survived it, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who sleeps too easily, and subscribe for more original horror stories delivered straight into your nightmares. And if you have a true tale or twisted idea you'd like me to bring to life, leave it in the comments below. I read them all. Some of my favorite stories come from minds just like yours. And so the final candle is burned out, but some stories never really end. They wait in the corners of your mind, and now so must you. You have heard the incantations of the demised, the shadows sworn to secrecy. But what slipped through, what followed you back into the light, if these stories stirred something inside you, if they made you hesitate before turning off the lights, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because next time, we're going deeper. So rest while you can, because next time the story just might be about you.